Is President Trump ready to move on after last week's big fail on Republican efforts to dismantle Obamacare? Short answer, it appears not. Instead, throwing around taunts and threats at his own party in the aftermath, including this statement he put out on Twitter just a short time ago. If Obamacare is hurting people, and it is, why shouldn't it hurt the insurance companies, and why should Congress not be paying what public pays? But there's more to it than meets the eye. Or the tweet, I guess, in this case. We will get to that. CNN's national correspondent Suzanne Malveaux joins me live right now from Capitol Hill. So, Suzanne, what is the president threatening right now?
Kate, you know, what we've seen over the weekend is the combination of threats, cajoling, shaming, whatever you want to call it here. But essentially what he's saying is that he is not going to provide, or the government is not going to provide, bailouts for insurance companies and what he calls bailouts for members of Congress. The way that most members of Congress get their insurance is through the D.C. exchange, which in part is subsidized by the federal government under Obamacare. Now, what the president has been saying pretty consistently is that he's going to allow Obamacare to implode. There are a couple of threats that seem quite serious. One of them is to take away the government subsidies to insurance companies, those contributions they make that actually allow low-income folks to afford coverage, and that would be in the tune of maybe perhaps as much as $7 billion. The other thing that he is talking about is not enforcing the individual mandate, which really allows and requires that young, healthy people are part of the system. So those are the things that he is tossing out. But there is definitely, Kate, this back and forth, this blame game that continues. And the real question is whether or not there are going to be Democrats and Republicans who are willing to continue to find a solution, or at least ways to tinker around the edges, the problems that are facing Obamacare. This one congressman from earlier this morning says, no, the Democrats own it.
They are going to wear it. You know, we said to America, and America agrees, Obamacare has failed. It's failing. It's imploding. I have suggested to the president we absolutely end the cost-sharing revenues on Tuesday. That's tomorrow, to insurance companies.
So that was Chris Collins. Senator Susan Collins of Maine, she has a different idea. And of course, what she wants to do is bring Republicans and Democrats together to try to figure out ways to stabilize the market. There is also another group on the House side called the Problem Solvers Caucus. They are trying to do the same thing, Kate. So we'll see how this goes.
We will have to see. Chris Collins, Susan Collins, no relation, and definitely not on the same page when it comes to health care either. Great to see you, Suzanne. Joining me right now to discuss, CNN senior political commentator Rick Santorum. He's, of course, a former Republican senator and former Republican presidential candidate. Also with me, CNN political commentator and Republican strategist Ana Navarro. Hello, friends. Senator, first to you. Cutting off payments to the insurers, the payments are used to help low-income folks afford coverage. Is that a good idea as a next step in your mind?
You know, I think the president has to start to get tough with these Republicans who are walking away from trying to fix health care. And if it means shaking up the system a little bit for the short term, I think that's not a bad thing. If you look at what insurance companies have already baked in, the fact that this money is going to go away with their increases for next year. So I don't think it'll be a huge shock to the industry, but it will be a shock to Washington. And look, I think the president has to take some leadership here. I think he wants to do that. As I've said many times, I think he needs to go outside of Washington. Washington has failed, and now it's time to do what we did back in 1996 when we did the last entitlement reform on welfare, and that is to go outside of Washington, to bring in our Republican governors from around the country, meet and come up with a solution that drains the swamp, gets the money out of Washington, puts it back in the hands of governors. And this is something that, in my opinion, should have been done from the beginning. It's to paraphrase Winston Churchill's, Republicans will do the right thing after they've tried everything else first. So they failed on everything else. Now it's time to get the right solution that worked in the past. And Donald Trump can be the savior here. He can be the leader in working with Republican governors outside of Washington to make this happen.
So you've got the Rick Santorum of the world saying, buck up, fellas and ladies, let's get to it and let's get to the business of it and continue fighting to reform the health care system. But Anna, Republicans on the Hill, they seem to not be there. They seem ready to move on to tax reform, leave the health care fight for another day, or leave it completely. I don't know. But if you look at the president's Twitter feed, I think it counted up as almost a dozen tweets on health care or the process in the Senate that he was attacking just over the weekend. He's not ready to let it go. Where does that leave everybody?
Well, here's the problem. First of all, you know that Donald Trump is a dog with a bone. He never lets go of anything, right? And this for him was a huge political blow. It was a blow to his ego. He's the art of the deal guy. He couldn't get the deal done. He's never going to let it go. And frankly, he shouldn't let it go. And the American people shouldn't let it go. And Congress shouldn't let it go, because this is a system that needs to be fixed. Not doing anything is not an option. There are too many flaws with Obamacare as is, and it's going to end up collapsing if it is not. So if there's not a solution offered. But there's a bigger problem here. Like when I've been hearing this entire discussion right now, and folks are talking about Democrats are going to wear it or Republicans failed. The president is flogging Congress and flogging the Senate for having failed. What's not being talked about are the people who need insurance. What's not being talked about are the lives that are at risk. And so at some point, we got to stop seeing this as a political chess game, and we've got to start seeing it as an American crisis that needs to be solved and put the focus where it needs to be.
Well, and what you're talking about, Anna, the president spoke to directly just on Friday. Senator, let me play it for you. This is, I guess we could consider it another route that the president is suggesting that Congress can go. It's basically just leave it and let it implode on its own. Listen to this.
You know, I said from the beginning, let Obamacare implode and then do it. I turned out to be right. Let Obamacare implode.
So is that the president trying to work for a solution? I mean, do you endorse that move, Senator?
Look, I think anything the president could do to shock the system here, to get them to continue to work on this, is a good thing. And I agree with Chris.
So you think maybe he doesn't believe it? It's that he's just trying to scare him straight?
Look, the president wants a success here. He doesn't want Obamacare to implode on his watch and him just sit there and do nothing about it. He wants to fix this problem. That's why he's tweeting. That's why he's pushing Congress. Look, this is an opportunity for Donald Trump that show that he can lead. This is an opportunity that he can say, look, we're not going to do the Washington way. We're going to go outside. We're going to bring people in, Democrats and Republicans. We're going to get input on this. We're going to get this money out of Washington. We're going to get it back to the states. We're going to let Democratic and Republican governors and their legislatures, fix this problem, get rid of Washington-centric health care, and let the states do what they do best, which we saw under welfare, which is deliver services closer to the people. This is exactly what he campaigned on. Now he has an opportunity to do that.
But I thought it was horrible. I think his words are not only irresponsible, I think they're also inhumane. What are we going to do with if Obamacare implodes? And I can see, where he's tempted to do that. Now, it's easy for him to do that. He is a rich guy with health insurance. Everybody in his family, everybody he cares about has health insurance. But there are very many Americans who need Obamacare on it right now. What are we going to do with those sick people if it implodes? What are we going to tell them? What are we going to tell the parents of those children? What are we going to tell the spouses? What are we going to tell these Americans? So I think that's just, at some point, get over the defeat, get over the political posturing, and get back to work. Get back to forming a plan that actually works. Get the input from Republican governors and from Democrat governors. Get bipartisan leadership to start working it and do what Congress is supposed to do. Compromise and address a national crisis now.
Well, what will happen, at least as it stands now, if they would let it stand and implode? It seems the left and the right are just going to point the finger at each other. But let me ask you about. Let me start with you, Anna, on one thing that we have seen change in Washington. Your reaction to General John Kelly stepping in now as chief of staff, Reince Priebus out. Do you think this changes everything?
I don't think it changes everything because, frankly, I have never seen a staff or a level of functionality of an office that is not an accurate reflection of the principal. The principal here is Donald Trump. Now, I will tell you, I know John Kelly. I got to know him well in Miami when he was Southcom commander. He is excellent. He is a leader. He commands respect and authority, and he doesn't have much patience for fools and for lack of discipline. So I think folks like Scaramucci, I think a lot of the folks that are in that Oval Office right now that have had walk-in rights, that Oval Office it almost feels like it's a public bathroom where anybody can go in at any moment and whisper into the president's ear. I think he's going to bring some order to that. The question is, can he change Donald Trump? Good luck with that. Any woman that's tried to set him, change a man set in his ways can tell you it takes more than a general. It takes a miracle.
Senator, let me ask you this. With Reince Priebus out, do you have a concern that the president has fewer and fewer, like no ties to the party left in his inner circle?
Well, I mean, he has Steve Bannon, which is real important. That's a base that is very important to this president, and I think that'll continue.
Wasn't the quote like basically he wanted to blow up the Republican Party at one point?
Well, he doesn't have any sort of traditional Republicans, like a Reince Priebus. But the bottom line is, most of the people working in his administration throughout there are Republicans, have been active Republicans for a long time. So I'm not that concerned about that. The bottom line for General Kelly is he's a Marine. He's someone who gets the marching orders and tries to execute. And I think that's going to be the most important thing he can bring to it, is really just this idea of being able to execute the game plan and follow through. So hopefully that will improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the White House.
We will see. This is one day I can just say that a whole bunch of times and no one can correct me on it. Great to see you both. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
President Trump under fire for encouraging police to rough up suspects during their arrests. Now the nation's police departments are pushing back against the president, the man who called himself the law and order candidate. And Vladimir Putin strikes back at the U.S. over impending sanctions, booting hundreds of employees from Russian missions, U.S. missions in Russia, with the warning that this may be just the beginning. Thank you so much, Poppy. Hello, everyone. I am Kate Baldwin. Welcome to the first day of the rest of the Trump presidency. A fresh start this morning with a fresh face as the new White House Chief of Staff. Retired General and former Homeland Security Chief John Kelly sworn in a short time ago to replace Reince Priebus, followed by a cabinet meeting that included a not-so-fresh face, or a lesser fresh face, Attorney General Jeff Sessions right now. His relationship with President Trump has turned remarkably sour in a remarkably short amount of time. Moments ago, the two were in the same room and face-to-face for the first time since the president kicked off his public shaming of Sessions. So with Priebus out and Kelly in, is it all sunshine and rainbows at the moment? The president seems to think so.
Good morning. This is our first cabinet meeting with General Kelly. He will be Chief of Staff, as you know. We all know him. We respect him, admire what he's done. And at Homeland, what he has done has been nothing short of miraculous. I predict that General Kelly will go down in terms of the position of Chief of Staff, one of the great ever. And we're going to have a good time, but much more importantly, we're going to work hard, and we're going to make America great again.
Also touted a lot of the successes of the presidency so far in that cabinet meeting, talking about economic numbers. So can the new chief of staff help jumpstart the president's agenda today? Lots of ground to cover on that. Let's start with CNN's Sarah Murray, who is live at the White House. So, Sarah, despite the past week, just forget it all, the president says. I mean, the president denied any hint of a problem within his White House today.
That's right. But look, we all know that you don't oust your chief of staff and replace them with a retired four-star general if you do not want a change in direction in the way things are going in this White House. And even staffers who are working in the West Wing are hopeful that John Kelly will bring some kind of fresh start, that he might bring a little bit more order, a little bit of a quieter West Wing, one that's been plagued with staff infighting and backbiting. But they're also hoping that he can help sort of kickstart the Trump agenda. The reality is the president had a bruising defeat last week. We saw healthcare collapse, and as much as President Trump wants to blame it on the Democrats, that was at the hands of members of his own party. So everyone is kind of waiting to see if the dynamic really will change under Kelly. And of course, there's some skepticism about that because everyone knows the tone is set at the top, and many people near the White House, close to the White House in Washington, aren't convinced that President Trump is prepared to change. Kate?
Yeah, the chief of staff you can change. The president, is he prepared to change, or has he changed? We will see, and probably the next 24 hours. Great to see you, Sarah. Thank you. Join me now to discuss right now CNN senior political analyst Mark Preston and Chris Whipple. He's the author of The Gatekeepers, How the White House Chiefs of Staff Define Every Presidency. Appropriate today. Thank you for joining us, Chris. Great to see you both. Try this one on for size. How is this for expectation setting? He will go down as one of the greats ever.
I mean, it's just ever. I mean, is there anybody he ever hires or he associates himself with, he always says that they will be the greatest, they will do the greatest, they will become the greatest. It's just Trumpisms at its best.
But has John Kelly taking on the post, has the West Wing fundamentally changed today?
No. Well, a couple things. One, and we were talking a little bit about this in the green room, I don't think the general is going to be able to go in and necessarily change Donald Trump, but can he go in and organizationally change everyone below Donald Trump? And in some ways, perhaps just ignore what Donald Trump does with the tweeting and what have you, and really try to enact change and try to get things done by working downward and then up to Capitol Hill.
Well, and that kind of gets to an interesting point. I mean, you have said, I've seen you say, Chris, that it's mission impossible for General Kelly if he doesn't have control over the West Wing. Why is that, and what does that look like, that control?
Look, I think the first thing that Kelly has to do is he has to figure out, is he working for a presidency or is he working for a TV reality show? I mean, this White House has been profoundly stupid and, quite frankly, unserious about governing for the first 6 months. It can't do anything right. A guy like Scaramucci shouldn't be within 100 miles of a functioning White House. And I think Kelly's first task is really, if he hasn't removed Scaramucci's White House credentials by Friday, I think he's failed on job one. Failing that, I think it has to be clear that Scaramucci and everybody else reports to the president through Kelly. If they don't, with the possible exception of the family and Bannon, if they don't, this cannot work.
So that means if the structure as is of yesterday remains in place, it doesn't matter who becomes chief of staff. Why is that gatekeeper role so essential? What aren't people getting?
The definition of insanity would be for John Kelly to try to take this job with the same authority that Reince Priebus had. We saw how that turned out. The last time we had a general, by the way, as White House chief, it was Al Haig under Jerry Ford after Nixon resigned. That was a disaster, and the reason it was a disaster is that Ford had the same idea Trump did. He thought he could run the White House by himself. Everybody had access to the Oval. They came and went willy-nilly. It was a disaster, and he wound up begging Don Rumsfeld to come in, empowered Rumsfeld, and he almost caught Jimmy Carter in the election as a result. But if you don't do that, history is littered with the bones of presidencies that didn't understand. You have to have an empowered White House chief.
Mark, kind of getting to a little bit what Chris is talking about. Peter Baker of the New York Times had a fascinating interview with one of the I think would go down as the greats in terms of the chief of staff, James Baker, and he said that Baker said that the job boils down to either focusing on the chief part of your title or focusing on the of staff part of your title. Success kind of coming through, and he says the success really is coming through focusing on the staff. What do you think the challenges are that Kelly is up against, if that's the case?
Well, loyalties that from those that are already in position right now, including the family, mind you, Ivanka and Jared, the loyalties that they have to the president and not necessarily to the office. So Scaramucci is a perfect example of somebody who says that he is going to come in and he's going to shake things up and that everyone needs to be loyal to the president and that he's going to fire anyone that isn't. Well, the fact of the matter is those in the West Wing who hold those positions should be loyal to the president in the fact that they're trying to get his agenda passed. But first and foremost, they have to be loyal to the Constitution, and they have to be loyal to the idea of getting things done. So what we can't have, quite frankly, is this weekend to have Donald Trump come out and say, let's get back and do health care, when you have the Senate Republican leader, who is a very good tactician, saying on Thursday and Friday, okay, we didn't get health care done, it's time to move on. You can't have that mixed message.
Go ahead.
Here's a troubling thing to me is I've talked to some of the ex-White House chiefs who have not had a phone call from Kelly. The first thing any really serious White House chief should do, is to pick up the phone to Jim Baker, the gold standard, and then to call Ken Duberstein, for example, who was Reagan's successful last chief of staff. Duberstein came in in a similar circumstance in a way. Reagan was on the ropes with the Iran-Contra scandal. There was a possibility of being impeached. Howard Baker and Duberstein sat down with Reagan. They decided that if he lied to them, they were going to resign. I think Kelly needs to go into the Oval Office, sit down with Donald Trump and draw a red line and say, if you want to have your tweets, fine. But if you tell a demonstrable lie on Twitter, I'm gone. You can find a third White House chief.
One One thing that was fascinating that I just saw this morning is much of what you heard the president in complimenting General Kelly on was his work over at the Department of Homeland Security, what he's done with the border, what he's done with immigration. Do you know who was working lockstep, hand in hand with General Kelly on that? Jeff Sessions over at Justice. I did a joint interview with Kelly and Sessions to talk just about immigration and the border and the efforts that they're taking on. But you've got one of them who's getting accolades and the other who is on the outs of all outs.
And that's why, I mean, the whole issue of loyalty is not to the person, it should be to the country and to the Constitution. We've seen Jeff Sessions, who showed unrestrained loyalty to Donald Trump all last year at a time when, you know, all those Republicans in Congress thought he was crazy for backing him. And then what have we seen? We saw that Donald Trump, President Trump, has turned on Jeff Sessions. We see that Rex Tillerson over at the State Department supposedly is having troubles right now with the White House. Doesn't feel like the White House has his back. So if you're General Kelly, you got to think to yourself, you know, to Chris's point, look, if you lie, if you're not with me on these things, then I'm out. It'll be interesting if he actually had that conversation.
What is the... General Kelly's not going to... Who knows if he's got, how many interviews he's going to do. What is the signal, the sign, the indication you're going to get if there's a change? What are you looking for to see?
Well, you're looking for an end to Trump's unrestrained use of Twitter. You're looking for discipline. You're looking for... I mean, this White House is completely broken right now. There would be a massive repair job. First of all, it can't pass legislation. It can't issue executive orders that are enforceable. It can't prioritize the president's agenda. Nobody knows what that is. It can't get anybody on the same page. Those are all the things that in a healthy, functioning White House, they all come down from the White House Chief of Staff. You can have robust debate. You can have Bannon arguing with everybody else. But at the end of the day, when the president makes a decision, everybody needs to fall in behind the White House Chief of Staff and execute it. That's how you'll know if this is working.
So that lays it out very easy. He's got an easy job ahead of him starting today.
Very
That
easy.
seems very obvious from this discussion.
Piece of cake.
Yeah, exactly. That's the name of your next book. Piece of Cake, The Life of a Chief of Staff. Great to see you, Chris. Thank you so much. Great to see you as well. President Trump daring Republicans to act on health care after last week's big failure, including his threat to cut off help to low-income Americans under Obamacare. Plus, Russia's revenge. Vladimir Putin ordering hundreds of American diplomats out after Congress votes to slap Moscow with new sanctions. Now the Kremlin says this is just the beginning. And what is it about Chris Christie and sporting events? Honestly, a new chapter when the New Jersey governor confronts a heckler basically nose to nose. See what happened.
President Trump urging Congress to get back to work on health care or he will, quote, let Obamacare implode. The president is also threatening to cut subsidies to Congress people and insurance companies that cover low-income Americans. Just moments ago, he tweeted this: if Obamacare is hurting people, and it is, why shouldn't it hurt the insurance companies, and why should Congress not be paying what the public pays? Let's discuss with Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland. He's a member of the Appropriations Committee. Senator, thanks so much for being here.
Great to be with you, Alice.
Let's start with that question that the president poses one more time. If Obamacare is hurting people, why shouldn't it hurt the insurance companies? And why should Congress not be paying what the public pays? What is the answer to that?
Well, first of all, Obamacare is not hurting people. In fact, what would have really hurt people was if we had passed Trump Care. And we know from the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office that that would have thrown tens of millions of Americans off of affordable care.
Right, but you know not everyone is delighted with Obamacare and that people have grave reservations about it.
Allison, nobody has said it's perfect. We've said from the very beginning we need to improve the exchanges. The first order of business is for the president to stop trying to sabotage the exchanges. There are a couple things that are totally within the power of the Trump administration. Number one, the cost-sharing payments that you just mentioned. Those have been going on for a long time. He's threatened to cut them off. That has created uncertainty, and that's why you have insurance companies threatening to increase premiums. Number two, enforce the individual mandate so you don't just have sicker, more intense care patients in the exchanges. Three, make sure you advertise the fact that the exchanges are now open and people should enroll. Congress can then get back to the regular order, as Senator McCain said, and work on a number of other things to both strengthen the exchanges in the short term, but also we should work on things like reducing the cost of prescription drugs and other things that we can do on a bipartisan basis.
The president seems to be suggesting that you in Congress, that members of Congress are sponging off the system somehow and you don't deserve subsidies or any federal dollars. What's your response to that one?
Actually, that's just flat out untrue. Members of Congress are in the exchanges like anybody else. Members of Congress are treated like every other federal employee that works for the United States government. So the president is actually just trying to stir the pot as usual on these issues. He doesn't have the facts on his side as usual. I'm hopeful that you're going to have Republicans in the Senate and the House now saying that they want to work with Democrats. Time to ignore the president's tweets. The president has also, threatened Senate Republicans and said that they should go to a different voting system. Why don't we just focus on working together to improve the exchanges in the short term and then work on these bigger issues like reducing the cost of prescription drugs? I think within the exchanges we should offer a public option in the exchanges. That would create more competition. It would drive down prices.
One more thing on this, because we just had Congressman Chris Collins on, who wanted to remind everyone that the subsidies were, that House Republicans actually sued the Obama administration over these subsidies that the president seems very focused on, and that a district judge ruled that they were illegal because Congress didn't appropriate them. You're on the Appropriations Committee. How can you justify these subsidies that your committee, that Congress didn't ever approve?
Well, the original legislation essentially directed funding for these payments, these cost-sharing payments, in order to provide stability in the exchanges. If my Republican colleagues want to join together and vote through the appropriations process to provide those payments on an annual basis, that's fine. Even better would be if Congress got together on a bipartisan basis to pass legislation that mandated the cost-sharing payments going forward. But as you indicated, the courts have asked questions about that. I should point out
decided,
that,
right? I mean, this district court decided that it was illegal.
A lower court level made a decision, but and importantly, they did not direct that the payments end. That is really important. I mean, they made a decision, but they said the payments can continue as that case was contested in the higher courts. So there's nothing to prevent the president at this point in time from continuing the cost-sharing payments. In fact, he's been doing it, but he's been doing it on a month-to-month basis instead of providing the certainty that everybody needs going into the fall. So he's been doing that. And there's no reason for him to stop doing that now, other than the fact that he might want to sabotage the system.
Senator, I want to read to you, there's another new tweet from the president that just came out. I've not read it yet, so we're going to put it here, I think, on the screen so that we can all read it together. Highest stock market ever. Best economic numbers in years. Unemployment lowest in 17 years. Wages rising. Border secure. No White House chaos. Your response?
Well, let's just start at the end. I mean, obviously, there's incredible chaos in the White House, which is why they're bringing in General Kelly. I think the struggle for General Kelly is going to be that normally a White House chief of staff has to try and organize the staff. In this case, you have a commander-in-chief who is totally out of control, tweeting at all hours of the day and night, and there's no consistency to the policy. I should point out that when it comes to the economy, you're continuing to see what you saw under the previous administration, which is continued growth. But the reality is there are lots of Americans who are still being very squeezed between rising costs and flat paychecks, which is why, Allison, the Democrats on a bicameral basis, House and Senate, have put forward a plan to focus on the economy, to focus on bread and butter issues, and come forth with concrete measures we can take to improve the economy, improve jobs, and also wages.
Well, look, I mean, I think his point is that despite whatever's going on in the White House, the stock market is having a banner month or banner run, the highest ever. Unemployment rate has dropped to the lowest in anyone's memory, recent memory at least. So, I mean, I think that the president would say his point is that things on that front seem to be working.
Well, as I say, there are millions of Americans that are really hurting. The reality is that what you're seeing under President Trump is a continuation of what was a steady decline in unemployment. You saw that beginning under the administration of Barack Obama. They had a record number of months of economic growth, and that is continuing under President Trump. The trajectory that began under President Obama, both in terms of jobs and reducing the unemployment rate. Stock market was up under President Obama as well. But that doesn't mean that there aren't millions of Americans who aren't hurting. The reality is folks at the top are doing very well. Yes, if you've got a lot of money in the stock market, you're doing just great. But everybody else is being squeezed, and people are working harder than ever. The gains are going to the top 1%, folks at the very top.
Yeah.
Everybody else is seeing flat paychecks or they're falling behind, which is exactly, Allison, why we put forward a plan to begin to address those issues so we can grow the economy, but also do it with more shared prosperity.
Senator Chris Van Hollen, thanks so much for taking time to be on New Day.
Thank you.
John.
All right, tropical storm forms in the Gulf of Mexico. Who is in the storm's path? That's next.
Out.
So President Trump's election win surprised much of the country. And tonight, there's a new CNN special hosted by Fareed Zakaria that explores why Trump won. Let's take a look.
The happiest people tend to be the people that are making a nice income, that really enjoy their life and their family life, and not the people of tremendous wealth that are constantly driven to achieve more and more success. You're expected to be a certain kind of a person, and maybe you're not necessarily cut out to be that kind of a person.
How did that Donald Trump become this Donald Trump?
I'd like to punch him in the face, I'll tell you.
Joining us now is Fareed Zakaria, host of CNN's Fareed Zakaria GPS. Fareed, great to see you. Answer your own question. How did that sort of what we see there looks like a more gentle, sort of romantic Donald Trump talking
He's a lover,
about
not a fighter.
how love should prevail over ambition and work, become the candidate Trump we saw there?
I think what you see in that part of the documentary is the sort of reinvention of Donald Trump. You begin to realize that the person he is now is a carefully honed persona that he created through trial and error, taking advantage of opportunities. And I think there are a few key moments in his life. The first is he began to realize the power of celebrity and the value of celebrity. And The Apprentice for a while, not as much long as he says, was the #1 show, 28 million people watching it. I think that made him realize, my God, this is powerful stuff. That's when he really gets out of the real estate business and goes into the branding business. But then he also starts feeling the currents of America in very much an intuitive way. I don't think he had any articulated sense. And he began to feel a few things. The anger against politicians. Remember, he runs on the Reform Party. He tries to run on the Reform Party ticket for a while. And then he begins to see the toxic energy on the far right. Remember, his first political moves are birtherism.
Absolutely.
And he knew that the election of a black president had stirred a kind of ugly racial animus among some people, probably a small subset, but he knew a way to get directly to them. So all of it combined, and it was the man met his moment. The point at which Donald Trump is elected is literally the low point in trust for politicians in Washington. It's a 50-year low. And that's when Donald Trump, so he got his timing right, which all great performers need.
It's about the man right there, and we saw that crippler lover, not a fighter moment. But then there's the moment. Talk to me about the moment, Fareed, this sort of socioeconomic hunger that existed, or to an extent still exists in the United States.
I think the part of it that I was most impressed by in doing the research for this is we know about the economics, we know about the hollowed out factories and the coal mines, and what I was struck by was the other two factors. So that's, if you will, capitalism. The other factor is culture, a real sense of cultural alienation that older, white, non-college educated Americans have, the sense that their country is changing because of immigrants, because maybe blacks are rising up to a kind of central place in society, because of gays being accorded equal rights, because of, frankly, a lot of working women. Everybody is sort of muscling in on a territory that, if you think about it, the white working man had. But the final one is class, social class. We don't talk about it a lot, but the election of Donald Trump is really a kind of class rebellion
against people like us, you know, educated professionals who live in cities, who have, you know, cosmopolitan views about a lot of things. And I think there's a whole part of America that is sick and tired of being told what to do by this, you know, overeducated professional elite that Hillary Clinton in many ways perfectly represented. And that's why they're sticking with him.
Yes, and that's why when Democrats think, oh, how long can this go on? Surely the chaos will mean that he would never be reelected. Those factors that you're talking about that got him elected haven't changed. They still exist in the foreseeable future to 2020.
I think that if you think about one of those Trump voters, imagine what it would mean for them to say, you know what, I was wrong about Donald Trump and the New York Times was right. They're not going to do that. They're going to, you know, there's a lot of stickiness to his support.
So what shakes that then? If anything, Fareed, does it have to be a different view of what America has become to them, or a sense that President Donald Trump has failed to deliver on the things that they were expecting him to deliver on?
It's a great question. You know, the research shows that people don't vote so much on policy issues. I mean, there are studies that show at the end of an election, you ask people what party stood for what policies, and about more than a third get it wrong. They think the Democrats are for repealing the ACA and the Republicans are in favor. You know, what they vote for is, does this guy get me? Does this person know me? You know, is he the kind of person? We have David Brooks on the program saying, what they ask themselves is this party full of people who look like me, who are like the people I hung out with in high school? And that's almost like a tribal team loyalty. So I don't think that, I don't have a good answer for what will shake it. I think what could change it is if you found a Democrat. Not the Democrats are all sitting there worrying about what exact economic policy they should have and should they be more, you know, left-wing. I think the key is, can you connect? You know, Bill Clinton had very, you know, kind of centrist policies, but he connected. A white working class voter looked at him and said, this guy gets me. And unfortunately, they didn't feel that way about Hillary Clinton.
So while we have you, so much happening, obviously, internationally between Russia, North Korea. What do you think 6 months in, how President Trump, I mean, just today, because there seems to now be a different stance towards Russia, obviously, if he's signing the sanctions bill. North Korea, once again this weekend, just launched another ballistic missile. How do you think the Trump administration is doing with these international crises?
Well, to be fair, in some cases, they have handled, the policy response has been appropriate, measured. You know, if you think about this Russia one, if you look at the, you know, the Syrian case. The problem is, I think that it is mostly because of delegation to a few good people like Jim Mattis. There is no strategy at all. The White House is essentially in chaos or paralyzed. In Russia, they've completely boxed themselves in. They can't follow any policy other than a hardline policy, because if they try to do anything cooperative, people are going to wonder why is Trump being so nice to Russia, and he has only himself to blame for that. But my point is, in many of these areas, because they did not have a strategy, because the president still does not know the details. So on North Korea, you know, the idea that gratuitously insulting China by tweeting against it is going to get you anywhere is highly, highly unlikely. So I feel like there hasn't been much damage done yet, but the process feels very chaotic, very ad hoc, very improvisational, and we're lucky in that we have not still faced. You know, one of the things about the Trump administration to remember is we have not faced a recession, we have not faced a serious international crisis. So all the chaos and dysfunction you're seeing, that's just without having really encountered any external problem.
Thank goodness. Fareed, thank you very much for all of that. Be sure to tune in tonight for Fareed's special report, Why Trump Won, 10 p.m. Eastern, only on CNN. Thanks so much for previewing it with us. We're following a lot of news this morning, so let's get right to it.
General Kelly will do a good job. He will bring some order to the West Wing.
President Trump hits the reset button.
All right, President Trump facing several foreign policy challenges, Russia's retaliations against new U.S. sanctions that are on the way, and North Korea's latest ballistic missile test. So how will the Trump administration respond? Joining us, former director of both the NSA and CIA, CNN National Security Analyst General Michael Hayden. General, thank you so much for being with us. You know, the situation with Russia right now, with Vladimir Putin saying he will kick out 755 people who work for U.S. interests in the embassy staff in Russia right now. How would you assess the current status of the U.S.-Russia relationship?
Well, John, it's about as dark as it's been in several decades. I actually heard someone describe the Russian view of the American administration right now as the president being Gulliver, tied down by all the Lilliputians in Washington, like me, the anti-Russian Lilliputian. So it appears as if President Putin, at least for the time being, has cut his losses in terms of a hope of a dramatic change in the Russian-American relationship. Although he didn't cut it completely, John, I think it was quite interesting that he took this step after Congress had passed the additional sanctions, but before the president signed them. So in other words, he's cutting out President Trump from this current action, a little glimmer, room to maneuver for him in the future.
So what does that mean? It means that you think he's not holding President Trump responsible?
Well, I think he's seeing that President Trump is unable to change the direction, the overall direction of American-Russian relations. And so as a matter of style, of keeping options open, the timing, doing it now, not waiting until the president has signed the sanctions, gives him a bit of an opening to play a card perhaps sometime in the future, Allison. But I think we're in this pretty dark state for a very long time.
It's pretty interesting. That's a pretty interesting a note right there that you think he's trying to give the president some space there. The vice president, right now, he's in the Baltics. And Vice President Mike Pence actually made the claim, and we'll play this for you, that it's the president's tough talk, as he's characterizing it, that caused Congress to issue these sanctions. Let's listen to the vice president.
I think the president's confirmed repeatedly that we believe Russia did meddle in U.S. elections. I think he's also said that it could have been other actors as well, but he's confirmed his belief and our intelligence that Russia was involved in meddling in U.S. elections, and it's part of what inspired the bipartisan action in the Congress to codify the sanctions that our administration has been implementing against Russia, and we'll continue to advance that.
Now, General, it may very well be that the vice president's right, that the president did inspire Congress to pass these sanctions, but I'm not sure that the inspiration is quite how he portrays it. It seems as if Congress is saying, we're taking this out of your hands.
Yeah, actually, you know you're winning in Washington, John, when you begin to say that it was your idea rather than the other guys. Although there is one important aspect here that I think we should not ignore, and that's the vice president's trip. He's going to Estonia, Georgia, and Montenegro. 3 countries, 3 friends of the United States who have all had one form of Russian intervention or another since 2007. That's actually a remarkable journey, and I think in itself a pretty strong signal to the Russians that at least the vice president's office very much objects to their behavior.
Well, look, the president went to Poland, too, before he met, with the G20. So the president, is clearly involved in sort of this geographic boxing in as well. It does seem deliberate.
General, let's talk about North Korea. It just seems to get worse and worse. The news just seems to get worse and worse. There's never any glimmer that North Korea is listening or going to change or cowed at all by the international community. Just this weekend, yet another ballistic missile test. What can the U.S. do?
Allison, not much. Our options here are limited. I think the Trump administration is now beginning to realize that there are some problems out there without real solutions. There are conditions to be managed, and their predecessors didn't have to be weak or unintelligent for this problem to continue. Look, let me lay out maybe 3 tracks that we could go down. One is accepting the North Koreans as a nuclear power. That's not very good. The other is doing something kinetic that could very likely lead to very serious conflict on the Korean Peninsula. That's not good. So where are you left, Allison? You're left where the last 3 administrations have been. Diplomacy, sanctions, and perhaps bucking up the defenses of ourselves and our friends in the region. That's where we are.
General, can I ask you a question? Do you think Kim Jong-un, and to a lesser extent Vladimir Putin, and other leaders around the world are watching what's going on in the United States, sort of the chaos that has existed in the West Wing over the last week specifically, but longer in some cases, and seeing that as something they can take advantage of?
I think that might apply more to Putin than to Kim Jong-un. I think Putin sees things on a more global scale. He's actually a clever tactician, even though he might have some strategic weaknesses. For Kim Jong-un, John, I think this is an inevitable logic for the survival of the North Korean regime. So Allison teed this up by saying they don't seem to pay attention. They don't seem to respond. No, they know what they have to do, and I think this course is set. We can moderate it. We can slow it. Perhaps we can even cap it. But these guys are going to be a nuclear power.
Well, here's what President Trump tweeted about this, and I want to get your response. He says, I'm very disappointed in China. Our foolish past leaders have allowed them to make hundreds of billions of dollars a year in trade, yet they do nothing for us. With North Korea, just talk. We will no longer allow this to continue. China could easily solve this problem. Your response to some of those theories?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts immediately come to mind, Allison. Number one, there isn't enough chocolate cake at Mar-a-Lago to convince President Xi to fundamentally change the Chinese approach to North Korea. That's baked into the Chinese definition of self-interest. The other part of the tweet, though, I think is even more interesting, and that's the president beginning to link the Chinese-American commercial relationship with Chinese behavior against North Korea. That's a big step, and we'll see if the president actually carries that out.
And would it be a good idea to carry that out and hurt China somehow on trade?
Appreciate it very much. Let's get some reaction. Mike Rogers, first to you. What do you think?